It's time for the Russ Belville Show's Cannabis Q&A with Dr. Mitch Earlywine. Dr. Earlywine is a professor of psychology at the State University of New York at Albany and a leading author and researcher on cannabinoids and health, who pins the Ask Dr. Mitch column for High Times Magazine. Get your questions ready in our live chat or call in to 971-533-7111 now.
All right, everybody, he's back and better than ever. It's Dr. Mitch Earlywine on the phone with us. How you doing, Dr. Mitch?
Having a great day.
Oh, me too. Looking forward to spring. We've got all sorts of celebration. I believe Passover's happening. We've got Easter coming up for, depending on which side of the New Testament, Old Testament you come down on. But all sorts of things happening. We're glad to have you back on the show. And as we always do here, it's live call in at 971-533-7111. If you got questions for Dr. Mitch Earlywine, he's the author of the Ask Dr. Mitch column in High Times Magazine. You can just call in or get involved in our chat room. Send a chat question there via our Ustream, and we'll get those questions ready for him right away. But first, we always let the good doctor let us know what's happening in the world of science and statistics and polls. What's the latest in science, Dr. Mitch?
As it turns out, the New York State medical marijuana laws have finally been drafted, one version in the state Senate and one version in the state House equivalent, and that's totally encompassed me. I'm so preoccupied with that, I haven't actually seen any new data, but at this time of year, that's not a complete surprise, so that's really my only update, is that New York State is actually looking at a medical marijuana law.
All right. Well, that's good news. You're based out there in Albany, so that'd be good news out there for you and all the patients out there in New York State. We're looking forward to that. I wanted to ask you a question because I did some research recently, and I was taking a look at the DEA's drug scheduling and their categorization, and learned that there's a number. Every DEA scheduled drug has a number, and the marijuana number is 7360. And then from 7360 to 7379, they list various different types of cannabinoids. One thing, of course, we all know is that THC is Schedule 1 and marijuana itself is Schedule 1, which is kind of weird. The plant and what you get out of it are both Schedule 1. But here's something I didn't know, Dr. Mitch, and I wanted to get your comment on it. Dronabinol, the synthetic THC itself, is Schedule 1, but dronabinol in a sesame oil soft gelatin capsule is approved by the FDA is Schedule 3. So what the hell is it about sesame oil that makes cannabis safe?
I mean, this is just a beginning of the hypocrisy of the scheduling system. So in theory, because the essentially suspension in the sesame oil allows for a way to determine dosage better, that gives it an advantage, and so it can be administered essentially at the recommendation of a doctor at a fixed dose. So that's the rationale we're getting. Meanwhile, just to add insult to injury, cocaine, which we all know is about as dangerous as drugs can get, Schedule 2. Yeah. Because it has medical uses in intraocular surgery, so it closes down capillaries and creates local anesthesia on certain eye doctor operations. So yeah, this is completely insane, and I'm not about to defend it.
Well, we went through the list yesterday and even noted Desoxin, which is the trade name for methamphetamine, that's Schedule 2. So it's amazing. Another thing I learned in here, Nabilone, which is the trade name is Sesamet, is Schedule 2. So is it what is it because it's not again no sesame oil with Nabilone? Is that the deal?
Well, and the thing is that actually does have some established neurotoxicity, so it's markedly more dangerous than good old sesame oil and THC, and ends up in Schedule 2.
Wow.
I mean, it's complete madness.
And the only other one here, I found one I'd never heard of before, parahexyl or synhexyl. Does that ring any bells, and what the hell is that?
It was proposed as an antidepressant at one time, but I honestly don't feel like it's got any modern uses that folks are still going with, but I haven't been on top of that literature in over a year.
Yeah, all of these things, and they go on in the list to talk about how just because something's not in this controlled substances list doesn't mean they can't bust you for it. Anything that has the same pharmacological properties or is purported to have the same pharmacological properties can get you busted. Is the urban myth true about people getting busted for, trying to sell a bag of oregano and saying it's pot?
In fact, that is true. As it turns out, this developed because the designer drugs were moving so fast. So they made MDA illegal, and then folks quickly developed MDMA, and they wanted to kind of be ahead of these folks who could, just basically add an oxygen molecule and suddenly have a legal drug again. But this essentially conspiracy to sell cannabis, even if it is a bag of oregano, does seem to be at least a legal possibility. And not just an urban legend.
All right, we got some questions coming from our chat room. One here from Herb Staley, and recently, as of course Washington's had its famous or infamous 5 nanogram per se limit, and people have been paying attention to the issue of marijuana in driving. One kind of rule of thumb people have thrown out. Some people have said, wait 4 hours. After you smoked, wait 4 hours, you should be fine. Herb is asking here, do I need to wait longer than 4 hours to drive after eating an edible or taking some tincture? And I guess we could just generally address the whole how long should you wait before you drive?
In truth, I'm not a fan of these heuristics and rules of thumb, simply because everybody's different, your dosage is different, and all of those things. Edibles tend to metabolize more slowly and stay in your system longer, so any rule of thumb like that could be problematic. When you think about some of the behavioral correlates, though, of intoxication that are like the roadside sobriety test, that's what I would recommend. If you can stand on one foot with the other foot extended 18 inches and hold your arms out and do that for 30 seconds, a count to 30 aloud, and you don't mess up any of the numbers, and you don't touch your foot down, and you don't sway like a maniac, I'd say odds are high you probably could drive. If you can't do that, it's probably time to spend the night at somebody else's house.
All right. I agree personally. I always thought trying to wait how much time is problematic. And I'm wondering, with the respect to the tinctures and the edibles, those are things I tend to stay away from. I like to call those horizontals. I need to have some place to lay down if I'm going to have those.
They're great if you're at home and your bed is handy.
Exactly. So is that, something that people need to take into account, is maybe a longer onset time where, if they just had a brownie and then say, well, I feel fine, I'm going to go drive, and then, 30 minutes later.
In fact, and that's very important when you're considering subsequent doses. So sad but true, a lot of folks eat a brownie, think I'm not feeling anything after 45 minutes, I should eat another one. Trust me, no, you shouldn't. And the sad fact, too, is people go an hour and a half, get the munchies, and what's available, more brownies. That's always a bad idea.
Okay. I've got a question. I'm just kind of pulling this from our chat room. They're having some discussion, and two of our longtime listeners are educators. One, a teacher in public schools here in America, another one working university work in a foreign land. Both of them had a situation where they were forced out of their teaching positions because it was known that they were advocates for cannabis. Has this ever been a pressure in your academic career, and have you heard of other colleagues where this has been a problem?
I'm afraid so, both for me and someone who just received a very prestigious award from Americans for Safe Access. So the problem is people just don't understand. So I was up for an award at USC and didn't get it, and I was rather disappointed, and found out later that someone had written to the president essentially saying my work was too controversial for the award, which certainly hurt my feelings. Here at SUNY Albany, folks have been incredibly supportive. Somebody wrote the provost an extremely outrageous letter about how I should not be molding young minds of the future, and she was quick to rise to my offense and argued academic freedom, and I felt very relieved. Unfortunately, that isn't always the case. But this is the risk we all have to take, and I feel like if I don't stand up, who's gonna? I get emails from folks who are still in the alcohol world doing the kind of research I used to do before tenure, when I was basically too afraid to do this. I know they're heavy cannabis users, but they're not about to do what I'm doing, and they think my opportunities for grant funding have been essentially restricted. I feel like the United States is bound to come around, and if I stand idly by, I'm just going to feel so guilty that it'll blow my buzz.
Well, we wouldn't want to have that, no. And you mentioned tenure. How much does that affect your ability to be, as you're here every week talking about marijuana with us? I mean, it must have a lot of effect.
Well, it's interesting because pre-tenure I was very frightened and did not have any marijuana publications directly, and one that was just kind of marijuana stuff offhand. I got to commend my grad student Mallory Laughlin, who presented down in Philly at Normal's recent Mid-Atlantic conference. And, she's in the thick of the second year of graduate school and is very much an advocate and very out there. And I really got to hand it to her. But I think when we go to the job market, I'm really going to have to write a letter that explains that, she's an outstanding scholar and that work is completely independent of any of this kind of activism. And I'm really keeping my fingers crossed that, at least in Washington and Colorado, there will be jobs for her.
Mm-hmm. All right, we have a question on, the latest phenomenon. Everybody's talking about dabs, and one of the stories that was just on Good Morning America featured Club 64 in Colorado, Frankie's in Olympia, Washington, where they're having these private clubs open up where people are using marijuana. And one of the ways that a few of these clubs are skirting the anti-smoking laws is by only allowing vaporization. And in one of I think it was the AP photo that I saw, it showed a woman administering, a BHO dab, the guy taking on, and the caption said, taking on vapor. And I just wanted to confirm that when people are using these oils on these hot nails, that's vapor and not smoke.
As it turns out, we're getting into some strange hair splitting, but in fact, because it is the oil and it's burning at such a high temperature, we really don't have the normal sort of pyrotechnics, if you will, that are associated with burning plants. So it's unclear if we have some of the same potential pulmonary irritants, some of the things that could bother your lungs, but it seems pharmacologically rather unlikely. Now, I do want to emphasize we do have some reports and some data we're gathering of folks who, get burned on the nail and folks who, mishandle a blowtorch, and obviously these are serious safety issues. But we're finding, at least among medical users, that the folks who use the dabs really aren't reporting any more negative consequences than your standard medical user. And I have cautious optimism about this practice. My concern, though, is that the dosage is just outrageous sometimes. And I would like to encourage folks to adapt the theme that a little dab will do you.
Yeah, I actually had what was called a glob, and it was it led me into a hyperemetic episode. Let's just put it that way. And this has convinced me that you're absolutely right. We need to start thinking this as sipping whiskey, if you will, and take it easy with the dabs.
I like that metaphor.
All right. Well, that's about all the time we got here for our Cannabis Science segment with Dr. Mitch. And folks, if you didn't get your question in or you're shy, you can always send it by email at 420research@gmail.com or visit our contact form at 420radio. There's a pull-down menu. You can select Ask Dr. Mitch from there. We also have an Ask Dr. Mitch forum where we're collecting questions as well. Dr. Mitch, thanks for joining us, and happy holidays to you, sir.
Same to you.
We'll be right back after these messages from our 420 friendly sponsors. Support these advertisers because their ad money goes